Frontal hair loss or receding hairline is one of the most prevalent forms of hair loss that we encounter and the hardest to reverse until now. I am AQBS and this is Back to the Barber. There are two areas of the scalp that are most problematic in hair loss: the crown, or the very top of the head. And if I were to pinpoint a primary reason for that, I'd say it's gravitational. Not a real word, but it perfectly describes the anatomical tension that is natural as the scalp skin literally sits on top of the skull in ways as seen here. It is also furthest away from the head arteries as seen here. But that's another video. Today we're going to be focusing on the second area that is most problematic, which is the frontal hairline. I've seen that 99% of hair transplant surgeries are focused in this area, and for good reason. The temples and the frontals are decimated by all alopecias, especially of the androgenic kind. In this video, we are going to cover just two of the main negative factors and the therapeutic reversals of the hairline receding phenomenon. At the end of the video, I'm going to give you bonus information that you can add to your regimen not heard anywhere else. Some of this information you probably have heard before, but much of it will be from my unique perspective, as the trajectory or reversal outline in natty restoration is new and novel, but the reversal stages provide information that you cannot find anywhere else. This data will allow you to target the hidden influences of your receding hairline and to modify your current regimen or protocol for efficiency. If you are natty or not, use human ingenuity products or not, have a hair transplant or get regular PRP injections or not, you will find great value within this conversation. Stay tuned, because what I am going to provide will pull you that much closer to resolving your hair loss issue for good. One of the most amazing moments that I experienced around 4 to 5 months into my hair loss restoration journey is the villous hairs, aka the unfertilized follicles covering my entire scalp. And although it was a great sight to see and a great accomplishment, I found even 6 months later that the villous hairs in the back and along the sides of the galea began to transition to anagen, while the frontal follicles stayed in the post-telogen villous stage. Naturally, I spent more time, energy, and care of the frontal hairline than all the other areas on purpose and intuitively, but despite that, it stayed relatively inactive and stagnant until I began to dive into the possibilities and the probabilities of why. Once I figured out what I was really up against, I knew I had to radically change my approach and or process, or the follicles would stay in a non-responsive and infertile state indefinitely. Here's my first observation. The main causes of your hairline receding is the fact that your forehead area does not grow hair. Let me explain. Follicles seem to take part in groupthink or group grow as a unit in a family section or areas. The closest that I can think of this is when women live amongst each other. Over time, their cycles begin to sync. It seems to be hormonal in nature, and the same with growth cycles of follicles per sections. These areas or units of follicles have a unique tempo. Even with transplants, they actually target specific areas of the scalp for donor hair because of this. The forehead is void of hair-growing follicles foremost, so your hairline is receiving its supply seemingly from the galea. It seems that the scalp circulation quality of the galea, or the overall top of the head, is the exclusive resource provider of the frontal follicles. The anatomy of the scalp plus the facial arteries location leaves the frontal hairline with very little recourse if things go south. When the galea circulatory system is in turmoil or struggling and inflammation is present, the frontal area is cut off from the main and only supply lines, and literally starvation and miniaturization of the follicles is inevitable. I noticed that the areas around the galea right along the walls or rings started growing in first. My theory at the time was resource sharing and the close proximity to the side hairs allowed an easier transition to the androgen stage. On the flip side, the hairs in the front are especially galea dependent, as the temples do not sit on the galea, nor are they of the same anatomy build. My theory was validated as my temples that hadn't had villous hairs for over a decade filled in over 6 months ago at the time of this video, and the frontal hairline still has 80% villous hairs. It seemed highly likely that where scalp conditions are decent, hair can grow again and eventually flourish. But when you attempt to regrow hair on an isolated area without circulation, it seems almost impossible, especially when you add fibrosis and lower dermis inflammation. My question was, how can I break up the calcification deposits, remove the lower dermis infection and irritation, and slowly cause the circulation to increase? My eventual answer: facial lipid draining and or massaging. Inactivity is a side effect of the quarantine. Once DHT suppresses growth and the scalp locks into a hardened alpha telogen producing state, inactivity is the primary state of the scalp. Everything grinds to a halt, and the longer that your body stays in this state, it slowly accepts this as baseline or normalcy. Many people consider derma rolling as just micro injury, but the injury is not just for healing of the follicles and the recompositioning of the scalp collagen, but simply to cause activity. And activity itself is the breaking of the loop of hair loss. Lipid draining or facial massaging releases the toxins or pathogens, proteins that are causing the inflammation, which leads to the fibrosing and the telogen comatose state of the hairline. By focusing on the lipid system of the face, especially forehead, you will break the cycle of the 4 pathways by reversing the mechanical physical changes and increasing vasodilation and circulation. This is also true of the entire head lipid system. It is a primary toxin holdout. Ever wonder what causes the immune response cycling after the trigger? Look at the lipid nodes. A very simple and effective way to break the comatose telogen state of the hairline follicles and begin to wake up the environment is gua sha, spelled G-U-A-S-H-A, the facial lipid draining activity that mostly women use for anti-aging purposes. I realized that the forehead was empty of hair follicles and growth hormones, but the other big issue was the inflammation and the fibrosis of the circulatory layer. I figured that if I can drain the lipids, then I would slowly eradicate inflammation and the frontal hairline would need less DHT. Then in turn, it would catch up to the other areas of the scalp as far as growth, or at least not lag as bad. The draining of the facial lymph nodes of the face and especially forehead is necessary because your frontal hairline has 2 distinct enemies that you were unaware of until now. The galea's malfunctioning circulation and hair loss that your frontal hairline is totally dependent on, and the inflammation or swollen blocked lipid nodes of the forehead and face that keeps DHT, therefore the fibrosis locally concentrated. This issue amplifies and strengthens the galea ring's constriction and compression of the scalp. Lipid draining through gua sha, like scalp cupping, eventually improves the conditions of both immune response and the hormonal imbalance of androgens in that isolated area. This is the nature of all frontal fibrosing. Here's the second observation. The galea ring is like an elastic band that separates the side of the scalp from the top or the galea. You can see it plain as day in Norwood 7s or severe hair loss when men have a perfect circle around the top of the head. Ironically, as you regrow hair, this horseshoe closes in as the hair circulation of the sides and the blood vessels open up once again. Hair would grow upwards against gravity, reversing the Norwood pattern, which I wouldn't have ever suspected as it's not intuitive. This observation in itself is gold. Why? If my hair is reversing in the opposite of the Norwood hair loss pattern, which is actually the human growth pattern, that means that what we are actually trying to do is reestablish the original hair growth circulatory systems and processes. This further solidifies my point that the mechanical physical changes is a strong contributor to hair loss. This band or ring is compacted with calcification or calcium deposits, while the tissue itself is thickened and hardened, compressing the vessels that deliver to the top of the head, already against gravity's pull downward. If you ever wondered why hair loss happens at the top, this is why. It's not that the follicles are weaker or that the sides have DHT resistant strains. The environment is just worse all around, not even to mention the tension between the front and the back muscles on the galea's fiber sheath. I shudder to think of the millions of dollars spent on research and all of the fancy laboratory equipment just to come up with those simplistic and incomplete theories. Using micro-injury devices on the galea, and especially the ring, allows the body to expunge and remove the excess calcium and lipids buildup, as well as the dried sebum or plaque that walls off this circulation. However, the inflammation of that area is the driver of this phenomenon. Thus, you want to focus on the causes of the inflammation and begin to reverse them, as well as the other side effects, which is fibrosis. The thickening of the skin is like using the next hole on your belt, which tightens it against your waist. This constriction of the galea smashes the arteries shown here, and over time, the natural, hormonal, and nutrition circulatory system is totally cut off. If you think the arteries are being compressed is the sole reason of the circulation issues, let me add that you should envision a scalp layer, such as the hypodermis layer, to be filled with piping, or better yet, a lake of blood, for lack of better words. When the other layers get compressed together, this lake disappears. Because the frontal hairline only receives its resources seemingly from the galea ring around the head not only causes a frontal line thickening, and with chronic inflammation present DHT concentration, the recession is further amplified by the fact that there are no follicles on the forehead. This is the nature of frontal fibrosis or hairline receding. Using gua sha or lipid draining jade instruments such as this, when you begin to do deep massages of the forehead and around the hairline, you will notice a few things. The sensation of irritation as you massage more deeply into the forehead, forcing out the acid buildup in the face, and the toxin buildup of the lipids will be telling. You will feel the burn as the veins in your head expand and get a pump. All the while, a stinging sensation will follow. You might also see splotches of redness in other areas of the face, as if the lipid, aka immune system, is activated. I was very surprised at the amount of stinging and burning under the epidermis as I simply massaged hard into the forehead. To make sure this was not just a local issue, I used those same instruments everywhere else on my face. I felt literally nothing. The only feeling similar to the forehead burning is the lymph nodes on the side of the neck below the ears. This is telling, as it is one of the most problematic areas for most people when it comes to acute or chronic inflammation. No wonder why neck massages provide such alleviation from tension and acid buildup. The forehead lipids are backed up as well, thus hairline recession through chronic inflammation. See it for yourself. Now, what made me decide to look at the forehead for hair loss? See, I calculated early on that if inflammation causes fibrosis, and the frontal hairline has the thickest and strongest fibrosis and hair loss, then there must be an inflammation locally present to magnify the already less than stellar circulation. I found this in the forehead lipid system. The inflammation to me is what probably eventually causes the wrinkling of the forehead, as the collagen is being dissolved by DHT, leaving only dried, aging skin with circulation issues, as the lower dermis becomes also calcified due to inactivity. As this goes on, both tension and compression increases. Focusing on reversing the plaque ring around the galea, and especially the frontal hairline, using micro-injury and kneading or massaging out the inflammation in the forehead due to lipid toxification, specifically targets the enemies of the frontal hairline. Does this help? Hopefully it does. As promised, here are a few bonus tips to restore your hairline. The extradermal scalp layers are invisible to the naked eye, but they do not belong in the scalp. If you do not see pore holes in the frontal nor villous hairs, you probably have several layers of skin that need to be peeled off in order to release your villous. As you perform dermal rolling with an acid product such as apple cider vinegar, lemon, or a human ingenuity product specifically designed for skin or scalp peeling, exfoliation, you will start to see the hairline gets darker, then it peels off. And eventually you will see the villous hairs erupting from those pores. Your topicals such as minoxidil will now be able to actually cause hair growth in the front. Isn't that great? Minoxidil has always worked for the frontal hairline. It's just that fibrosis blocked its absorption. If you consider calcium like fat in the body, you would see it as being around the organs or within the skin, but not really a part of it. Microinjury releases the calcium plaque buildup and purges it out of the body in the same manner. But instead of the body, it would be the localized scalp. A bit different than that is the actual extra topical skin layers or overproduction of the epidermis mentioned earlier. This should be stripped off of the top of the scalp like pulling tape off the wall as far as exfoliation. You're not purging anything, but removing an extra layer. In this extra layer is product buildup, hard water materials, and very old skin that was supposed to have sloughs off naturally, but because the scalp is in an inactive state, this system process too is offline. Make no mistake, Father Time will fight against you and the fact that the frontal hairline collapsed first, so it will come back in last. But as long as you work through it, you're going to find that you can not only begin to reverse your receding hairline, but you can bring it back to its original state. The follicles that were there previously are still alive, but in a telogen comatose state and waiting for conditions to change so they can produce hair again. So what are your thoughts on this? In your hair loss journey, are you also finding that the hairline has been one of the most difficult things to reverse? I'm guessing that hair loss experts and or hair transplant surgeons will agree. Let me know in the comment section and add your own expertise or experiences to this conversation, as iron sharpens iron and we only have each other. And remember, if I can do it, you all can do it too. Let's get you back to the barber.